The Crystal Cave by Mary Stewart, Book 1, The Dove, 4. After this, life settled back into its peaceful rut, and I think that my grandfather must eventually have accepted my mother's refusal to marry. Things were strained between them for a week or so, but with Camlac home, and settling down as if he'd never left the place, and with a good hunting season coming up, the king forgot his rancor, and things went back to normal, except possibly for me. After the incident in the orchard, Camlac no longer went out of his way to favour me, nor I to follow him. But he was not unkind to me, and once or twice defended me in some petty rough and tumble with the other boys, even taking my part against Dineas, who had supplanted me in his favour. But I no longer needed that kind of protection. That September day had taught me other lessons. Cedric's of the Ring-Dove, I dealt with Dineas myself. One night, creeping beneath his bedchamber on my way to my cave, I chanced to hear him and his pack of follower Breeze laughing over a foray of that afternoon, when the pair of them had followed Camlac's friend Alan to his tryst with one of the servant girls, and had stayed hidden, watching and listening to the sweet end. When Dineas waylaid me the next morning, I stood my ground and, quoting a sentence or so, asked if he had seen Alan yet that day. He started, went red, then white, for Alan had a hard hand and a temper to match it, and then sidled away, making the sign behind his back. If he liked to think it was magic rather than simple blackmail, I let him. After that, if the High King himself had ridden in claiming parentage for me, none of the children would have believed him. They left me alone. Which was just as well, for during that winter, part of the floor of the bathhouse fell in. My grandfather judged the whole thing dangerous and had it filled in, and poison laid for the rats. So, like a cub smoked from its earth, I had to fend for myself above ground. About 6 months after Gorlan's visit, we were coming through a cold February into the first budding days of March. Camlac began to insist, first to my mother, then to my grandfather, that I should be taught to read and write. My mother, I think, was grateful for this evidence of his interest in me. I myself was pleased and took good care to show it, though after the incident in the orchard I could have no illusions about his motives. But it did no harm to let Camlac think that my feelings about the priesthood had undergone a change. My mother's declaration that she would never marry, coupled with her increased withdrawal among her women and her frequent visits to St. Peter's to talk with the abbess and such priests as visited the community, removed his worst fears, either that she would marry a Welsh prince who could hope to take over the kingdom in her right, or that my unknown father would come to claim her and legitimate me, and prove to be a man of rank and power who might supplant him forcibly. It did not matter to Camlac that in either event I was not much of a danger to him, and less than ever now, for he had taken a wife before Christmas, and already at the beginning of March it seemed that she was pregnant. Even Olwen's increasingly obvious pregnancy was no threat to him, for Camlac stood high in his father's favour, and it was not likely that a brother so much younger would ever present a serious danger. There could be no question. Camlac had a good fighting record, knew how to make men like him, and had ruthlessness and common sense. The ruthlessness showed in what he had tried to do to me in the orchard. The common sense showed in his indifferent kindness once my mother's decision removed the threat to him. But I have noticed this about ambitious men or women in power. They fear even the slightest and least likely threat to it. He would never rest until he saw me priested and safely out of the palace. Whatever his motives, I was pleased with when my tutor came. He was a Greek who had been a scribe in Massilia until he drank himself into debt and ensuing slavery, and now he was assigned to me, and because he was grateful for the change in status and the relief from manual work, taught me well and without the religious bias which had constricted the teaching I had picked up from my mother's priests. Demetrius was a pleasant, ineffectually clever man who had a genius for languages and whose only recreations were dice when he won, and when he won, drink. Occasionally, when he had won enough, I would find him happily and incapably asleep. over his books. I never told anyone of these occasions. Indeed, was glad of the chance to go about my own affairs. He was grateful for my silence, and in turn, when I once or twice played truant, held his tongue and made no attempt to find out where I had been. I was quick to catch up with my studies and showed more than enough progress to satisfy my mother and Camlac, so Demetrius and I respected one another's secrets and got along tolerably well. One day in August, almost a year after the coming of Gorlin to my grandfather's court, I left Demetrius placidly sleeping it off, and rode up alone into the hills behind the town. I had been this way several times before. It was quicker to go up past the barrack walls, and then out by the military road, which led eastward, through the hills to Caerleon. But this meant riding through the town and possibly being seen and questions being asked. The way I took was along the river bank. There was a gateway not much used, leading straight from our stable yard to the broad, flat path where the horses went that towed the barges, and the path followed the river for quite a long way past St. Peter's, and then along the placid curves of the Tywye to the mill, which was as far as the barges went. I had never been beyond this point, but there was a pathway leading up past the mill house and over the road, and then by the valley of the tributary stream that helped to serve the mill. It was a hot, drowsy day full of the smell of bracken. Blue dragonflies darted and glimmered over the river, and the meadow-sweet was thick as curds under the humming clouds of flies. My pony's neat hooves tapped along the baked clay of the tow-path. We met a big dapple grey, bringing an empty barge down from the mill, with the tide taking it easy. The boy, perched on its withers, called a greeting, and the bargeman lifted a hand. When I reached the mill, there was no one in sight. Grain sacks, newly unloaded, were piled on the narrow wharf. By them, the miller's dog lay sprawled in the hot sun, hardly troubling to open an eye, as I drew rein in the shade of the buildings. Above me, the long, straight stretch of the military road was empty. The stream tumbled through a culvert beneath it, and I saw trout leap and flash in the foam. It would be hours before I could be missed. I put the pony at the bank, up to the road, won the brief battle when he tried to turn for home, then kicked him to a canter along the path which led upstream into the hills. The path twisted and turned at first, climbing the steep stream side, then led out of the thorns and thin oaks that filled the gully, and went north to a smooth level curve along the open slope. Here the townsfolk grazed their sheep and cattle, so the grass is smooth and shorn. I passed one shepherd boy drowsy under a hawthorn bush, with his sheep at hand. He was simple, and only stared vacantly at me as I trotted past, fingering the pile of stones with which he herded his sheep. As we passed, he picked up one of them, a smooth grey pebble, and I wondered if he was going to throw it at me, but he lobbed it instead to turn some fat grazing lambs which were straying too far, then went back to his slumbers. There were black cattle further afield, down nearer the river where the grass was longer, but I could not see the herdsman. Away at the foot of the hill, tiny beside a tiny hut, I saw a girl with a flock of geese. Presently the path began to climb again, and my pony slowed to a walk, picking his way through scattered trees. Hazelnuts were thick in the coppices, mountain ash and briar grew from tumbles of moss rock, and the bracken was breast-high. Rabbits ran everywhere, scurrying through the fern, and a pair of jays scolded a fox from the safety of a swinging hornbeam. The ground was too hard, I supposed, to bear tracks well, but I could see no sign either of crushed bracken or broken twigs that any other horseman had recently been this way. The sun was high. A little breeze swept through the hawthorns, rattling the green hard fruit. I urged the pony on. Now among the oaks and hollies were pine trees, their stems reddish in the sunlight. The ground grew rougher as the path climbed, with bare grey stone outcropping through the thin turf, and a honeycombing of rabbit burrows. I did not know where the path led. I knew nothing but that I was alone and free. There was nothing to tell me what sort of day this was, or what way Star was leading me up into the hill. This was in the days before the future became clear to me. The pony hesitated, and I came to myself. There was a fork in the track, with nothing to indicate which would be the best way to go. To left, to right, it led away, round the two sides of a thicket. The pony turned decisively to the left. This being downhill, I would have let him go, but that at that moment a bird flew low across the path in front of me, left to right, and vanished beyond the trees. Sharp wings, a sharp flash of rust and slate blue, and fierce dark eye and curved beak of a merlin. For no reason except that this was better than no reason, I turned the pony's head after it and dug my heels in. The path climbed in a shallow curve, leaving the wood on the left. This was a stand mainly of pines, thickly clustered and dark, and so heavily grown that you could only have hacked your way through the dead stuff with an axe. I heard the clap of wings as a ring-dove fled from shelter, dropping invisibly out of the far side of the trees. It had gone to the left. This time I followed the falcon. We were now well out of sight of the river valley and the town. The pony picked his way along one side of a shallow valley, at the foot of which ran a narrow tumbling stream. On the far side of the stream, the long slopes of turf went bare up to the scree, and above this were the rocks, blue and grey in the sunlight. The slope where I rode was scattered with hawthorn brakes, throwing pools of slanted shadow, and above them again, scree, and a cliff hung with ivy, where clouds wheeled and called in the bright air. Apart from their busy sound, the valley held the most complete and echoless stillness. The pony's hooves sounded loud on the baked earth. It was hot, and I was thirsty. Now the track ran under a low cliff, perhaps 20 feet high, and at its foot a grove of hawthorns cast a pool of shade across the path. Somewhere close above me I could hear the trickle of water. I stopped the pony and slid off. I led him into the shade of the grove and made him fast, then looked about me for the source of the water. The rock by the path was dry, and below the path was no sign of any water running down to swell the stream at the foot of the valley, but the sound of running water was steady and unmistakable. I left the path and scrambled up the grass at the side of the rock to find myself in a small, flat patch of turf, a little dry lawn scattered with rabbits' droppings, and at the back of it, another face of cliff. In the face of the rock was a cave. A rounded opening was smallish and very regular, almost like a made arch. To one side of this, the right, as I stood looking, was a slope of grass-grown stones, long ago fallen from above, and overgrown with oak and rowan, whose branches overhung the cave with shadow. To the other side, and only a few feet from the archway, was the spring. I approached it. It was very small, a little shining movement of water oozing out of a crack in the face of the rock, and falling with a steady trickle into a round basin of stone. There was no overflow. Presumably the water sprang from the rock, gathered in the basin, and drained away through another crack, eventually to join the stream below. Through the clear water I could see every pebble, every grain of sand at the bottom of the basin. Hart's-tongue fern grew above it, and there was moss at the lip, and below it green moist grass. I knelt in the grass, and had put my mouth to the water when I saw there was a cup. This stood in a tiny niche above the ferns. It was a handspan high, made of brown horn. As I lifted it down, I saw above it, half hidden by the ferns, the small carved figure of a wooden god. I recognized him. I had seen him under the oak at Tyre-Merthin. Here he was in his own hilltop place under the open sky. I filled the cup and drank, pouring a few drops on the ground for the god. Then I went into the cave. And that is the end of chapter 4.